Hello, and welcome to the Facility Resilience Podcast, where we cover all things facility design, operation, and maintenance, in addition to resilience and business continuity strategies. I'm your host, Jennifer Getz, and today I'm joined by Lynnda Nelson, President of ICOR, and together we'll be talking about Lynnda's upcoming session at the 2025 Continuity Insights Management Conference. So Lynnda, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
So I'd love to start out by learning a little bit more about your experience in the business continuity and resilience industry and how you first got involved in this space.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I probably don't have the normal business trend to get here. I actually started out as a high school teacher. My passion was teaching, and I was good at it. And I got my master's degree in teaching, but after having 4 kids in 5 years, at that time, it was really difficult to be able to work part-time or to job share as a teacher. And so I had to give that career up. And once my youngest went into kindergarten, I was really looking for, okay, now what do I do? And what do I want to be involved in? And I got lucky because at the same time, my husband was starting a consulting company, Business Continuity Services. And he said, well, you could help me out and kind of run the office and answer the phones and that kind of thing, because this was like the early days of the internet. This was 1998. So I did that, and I really, really liked the consulting aspect. I started getting much more involved in the day-to-day process of that. And then in 2000, DRII International actually hired our company to write their curriculum and all their education materials. We created their whole standard, how they named everything. They're still using all of that. And I enjoyed that work so much that in 2005, we went to DRI and we said, we think we can expand these professional practices to be broader and start talking about resilience. And we had a plan for how we wanted to do it. And their board at the time just was not interested in doing that. They said they were going to keep what they wanted. And so we decided to leave that work. And in 2005, we started ICOR. When I look back at it, I see that now our original curriculum that we developed we have an organizational resilience framework, was really about what we now would call operational resilience, which is where we look at bringing all the aspects of managing risk under one umbrella and really de-siloing. And so I took my education experience and used that to start writing curriculum and bringing other people on board who were experts in these different areas. So it's been 20 years, but ironically, back in 2005, this was still the early days of the internet, and Google didn't exist. And we were trying to come up with a name for ICOR. And so we have this long name. We wanted to be global, so we used international. I probably would have used global if I was doing it again. But we used the word consortium very intentionally because we wanted to bring organizations that manage risk together and to talking to each other. And then the word organizational piece of that was long, but it was also, we wanted it to be relevant to more than business, so that what we put together would work for any type of organization, government organizations, nonprofits, and then the word resilience. And back in 2005, when you did your Yahoo search, the word resilience was only about people, but made some people stronger than others going through the same sort of crisis event. So what I'm excited about is that we've had so much growth in this, and maybe just the pandemic really helped people to understand now what we're talking about with what we call organizational resilience.
That's so cool that you were able to blend your experience as a teacher in this space. So going off of that, I would love to hear about what does a holistic approach to organizational resilience look like to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a question that we get all the time. And usually I end up, even if it's not a question, I usually end up talking about it because the people that I'm listening to are really talking about operational resilience, and I'll say worst case, and I don't mean to offend anyone, but they're talking about business continuity and they've just rebranded it and said resilient, and they're not doing anything more than that they were doing when they were doing their business continuity job. And so that's really been the biggest part of our education program, is educating the public on what do we mean by organizational resilience, because even our definition of how we were teaching it has changed over the years. Like I said, what we started with was crisis management, how to run your data centers, how to run your IT systems. In that day, it was your, disaster recovery systems. Now we're talking more about information and communication, technology, continuity, keeping those operations going versus recovering them when they stop. And then we implemented business continuity. We actually implemented that later in respect to DRI because we had written their materials. We really didn't want to compete with them. But when that weren't going to be able to collaborate, we decided we would do that. And it was really one of our strengths too. But what we're seeing is that many organizations focus their resilience capabilities on being prepared and managing risk. And risk to things like natural disasters, which obviously we're seeing that they're becoming more often and more disabling, whether that's caused by climate change or something else. But we've also seen the impact of supply chain disruptions, and even in the U.S., how we're seeing that was such an impact during the pandemic with such the disruption of the supply chains that companies are actually spending the money to to shorten their supply chains wherever they can and to bring them back more local, which I did a blog and a webinar in 2019 on that topic. And the World Economic Forum was like, no, can't be done. Too expensive. These global supply chains are here to stay. And they've changed. And so this is something we have to start planning for. And we all know that an IT outage not only takes out our internet, but now it takes out our phones, because even in my office, TNT forced us to do the voice over IP, even though I didn't want to. But that's where the focus is often on. And while I always say this, while being prepared for the unexpected and managing risk is very, very important, it's also very narrowly focused on operations. And so organizational resilience is meant to bring that up to the strategic level, where you have an organizational resilience strategy. And as part of that strategy, you might be focusing on increasing your operational resilience capability and your capacity for that. Because oftentimes we only look at capability versus how long can we go managing under these different conditions, or, how many people and resources do we need to manage over a longer period of time than we're expecting. And so what we have looked at is, how can you address the weaknesses in your organization by developing strategies that strengthen all aspects of the organization? And if you want to work on operational resilience, you can do that in your own space. But if you're trying to work on being this from the top down, it has to start at the top. It has to be a strategy. And you have to have a way to measure kind of where you are and where are your strengths and weaknesses. And so that's really what our approach looks like. And I'm currently sitting on the authoring committee. So when you write international standards, you have a group of people, experts from around the world, that get together, and there might be 3 to 8 people that kind of write what they call a working draft, and then it goes out to a larger audience. So in 2017, the very first standard was published on organizational resilience, and it took us 10 years. We had to keep restarting it. And the reason it took so long was because everybody in the room was an expert, but they were an expert in their space, and they kept thinking that organizational resilience was about where they were. And so trying to get a defined body of knowledge that we were talking about was the biggest challenge. And so usually when you write an international standard, the body of knowledge is already defined. In 2017, literally, I think the primary outcome of that standard 22316, principles and attributes of more resilient organizations, I believe all we did was identify defining what it is we were talking about and putting some ideas in place as to those principles and practices, what they might look like. So now, 7 years later, we've put together a totally different document that includes much more information about what a more resilient organization looks like and how you might develop a strategy. And so we're just going to be launching that the first week of February. That'll go out to the different countries to have a look at that, what we call the draft document. It's a working draft. And we have about 2 years to finalize that, and I'll be really interested to see where it goes. And so I sometimes think of international standards as, like when you talk about 22301 for business continuity, those are minimum requirements for your business continuity management system. And that's a requirements document, where something you can be audited against, where the organizational resilience standard is a guidance document meant to educate. And so I really am trying to use the knowledge that I have to help with that process through international standards. And that really kind of ties in to what it is that we just finished doing for the past 3 years with our webinars, which is looking at that road to resilience journey. And last year we did webinars on each one of these topics, like, What is going to be our focus? What do our leaders need to be doing? Why should I participate in this? How does culture impact your journey? How do you manage change and onwards? And those are the topics that we're going to be talking about at the session that I'm putting on this year. And obviously, we did an hour for 11 topics. So there's 11 hours of material there that we're going to combine into a session at Continuity Insights. So we won't go into as much detail. But I really think what you're going to see as a focus of this is that beyond managing risk, we need to manage change. If we're not managing change, that inability to manage change becomes a risk to your organization. And ironically, more organizations go out of business from not managing change, like Kodak. They were the first company to create the ability to have pictures on the cell phone, but they thought it would compete with their paper, their Kodak paper. Well, who uses Kodak paper anymore? It was their inability, and there's dozens of examples like that, where companies, their inability to manage change has been the risk to their organization versus their inability to manage a crisis or an incident. And so we really need to be looking at how to be more agile. So when we look at this, whether resilience is being managed from the top down or the bottom up or somewhere in the middle, I think if you look at your job and you look at how can I manage change within my part of my role in the company, and then look at how can I be more agile. So we talk about agile project management and making your organization operate in an agile manner, which you need to do in order to manage change. And for business continuity people, I always give the example of, why are you still asking the question of how often do you do your BIA? The answer is you're doing your BIA continuously. You're providing data continuously in order to remain relevant. And you're not just, this isn't a single project that you re-look at on a periodic time. There's too much change to be doing projects like that. And so really my focus of the presentation is going to be, what is it that we're talking about? How can you in your job work in the most agile way possible?
I love that you mentioned change management, because I think that's what so many organizations struggle with. I think there are so many incredible solutions and tools out there, but if your organization's culture is changing, that's going to take some adjusting. So I'm very glad and I'm very excited to hear that your presentation will kind of focus on that area as well. So ultimately, I know you're going to be fitting in a lot in your presentation, but if there are a couple things you can think of that you'd want the audience members to really take away from your presentation, is there anything off the top of your head that comes to mind?
Yeah, thank you. I really want people to have a broader understanding of what organizational resilience is. If they can just walk away with, okay, here is my role in the organization, and here is how I contribute to increasing its resilience, and understanding that my soapbox is you can't just do a global replace of business continuity for resilience. And it doesn't mean that you're not contributing to resilience in your individual job, but understanding that it has to be the entire organization, and it has to be a strategy, and you have to understand how what you do fits into that strategy, and try everything that you can to be as de-siloed as possible. Get out of your lane. Business continuity people are best positioned to do that because they do collect data from all across the organization. They do have to work with people across the organization. So really challenging business continuity people to get out of your lane and to share about how they can help with the resilience of the organization, because business continuity needs to continue existing. And it's really one of the concerns that I've seen really since, maybe 1998, early 2000s, is the positioning of people in business continuity are in a different place than they were in the company years ago, and becoming really siloed and not having as big of an impact across the organization as we would like. So trying to leverage your position. And I don't think you can do that if you don't have an understanding of the strategic aspect of resilience.
Lynnda, this has been great. I want to ask you a bunch more questions, but I know we need to save some content for your presentation. So thank you for joining me on this podcast episode. We're very excited to welcome you to our conference.
I'm looking forward to being there.
Special thank you to our audience for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode of Facility Resilience.